All right, I'm just waiting for a few people to come in. Welcome, Sky. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
I was just having a look at when we last did this, and I think it was March that we last did our check-in. So trying to keep it with every 6 months, which I think is a good amount to do. I mean, sometimes every 3 months just comes along pretty quickly, and it does feel like we only spoke to each other, a few months ago anyway.
Yeah.
So for those that are joining us today, the purpose is to always check in with people that are on the ground because we hear so much media around a general sort of situation. And what I find is that when the media reports and it's based on the general, our clients and our investors think that it's relevant to their property. And as we know, it really depends on a lot of factors, location, supply and demand, and all of that, which is why really speaking or hearing from property managers on the ground is really important when you are an investor or if you're looking at buying. Sky, can you just do a quick rundown of where you're from, but also the locations that you currently focus on?
Yeah, sure. So I own tailored property in Glenelg. So while I'm based in Glenelg, I service pretty much every area in Metro Adelaide. So I've got a pocket in all four corners, north, east, south, and west. And I'm an Adelaide girl. I've lived here my whole life, so there's not too much about Adelaide I don't know. But yeah, it's certainly been an interesting last 12 months here.
Excellent. Now the questions that I'm asking today are very much just around what I find most investors are wanting to know. So that's a general market update, what rental yields are doing, what lease renewals are doing, what your home opens are looking like when a property is being marketed, and then we'll finish off with where the investors are actually buying at the moment, or if they are buying. So let's start off with, can we start off with the home open sizes? Because I'm really curious at this. What's going on? We've got big lineups of tenants looking area dependent. What does that look like?
It's definitely price dependent. So I think where we see the demand is $500 a week and under, because that's a significant portion of affordability for a number of people who are renting. Above that, what we're seeing at opens is really lower attendance. So it's about a 35% attendance versus registration ratio. So if they're registering, we'll have about 35% actually show up, and then that should correlate to at least half of that applying for the property.
What's your reasoning, or like what's your theory around people registering but not turning up?
I think that's probably part of the overall picture. So my friends at Tenant Options, who are the application platform that I use, they pulled some stats for me. And what it's showing is that we're really in a bit more of a tenant market at the moment. So this time last year, tenants were having to apply for 1.7 properties. So for every, I guess, time they were searching, they're applying for a number of properties in order to get one. Now it's 1.1. So the number of applications that tenants are needing to make is significantly lower, indicating that they have more choice.
Yeah. And when you talk about properties under 500 per week being really popular, so generally I would imagine they would be more the units or villas.
Yeah.
What would you consider a large home open size?
Um, I think 20 plus.
Yeah.
Long gone are the days that we've got 50, 60 groups through. Yeah, it's probably on average, I would say about 10 at a most.
Yeah, it's interesting. This has come up a few times just on the media with these big home open lines. And I have actually a little bit of an issue with property managers that are allowing these really big home opens as well. Like when our technology does allow us to cap, and whether, if you want to take into account the fact that not everyone shows up, I totally get that. But I think as well, like if you've got 100 people turning up to a home open, what that tells me is that you're sort of allowing for 150 or 200 or whatever people to actually book in, and that's, I feel, unfair on everyone's part. Like it's unfair for a property to manager to have to deal with that, but it's also unfair for potential applicants and tenants to have to deal with that chaos. Like that can't feel good for anybody.
No, no. And you would know about it in advance too. It's not like you suddenly rock up and you're bombarded. Like you would see
Yeah.
the coming through and have to make a plan for that. So yeah, there's definitely an oversight happening if that's occurring in this market, I think.
Yeah. With the properties that are getting the lower inquiries, are you finding that it's taking a while for investors to catch up with what's actually happening? I.e., are investors sort of saying, "Oh, but there's, a rental crisis. I want to advertise my property for 800, but you've only said, listen, it's really only 700." Is there any disconnect there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's part of that conversation that I'm finding I'm having with landlords initially, to set expectations because of what's portrayed in the media. It's definitely not the reality of what we're seeing, a very price sensitive market. And now the stats support it's a tenants market. It's no longer a housing crisis, it's an affordability crisis.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's good to see the similarities because yeah, very much the same as WA, that sort of cycle in that market. Let's have a quick talk about lease renewals and what's happening on that forefront. How are you finding a tenants staying, renewing? Are there big increase, little increases, no increases happening?
I'm finding most landlords are pretty reasonable in terms of the increases. Like we might say, for example, that the property might be worth 700 if we take it to market, but they're happy to accept, 680 from the existing tenant because reducing vacancy is always a good aim. With tenants, I'm hearing a lot of, interest rates are coming down. So their, I guess, assumption is that rents won't be increasing. So there's still a lot of conversations around the overall costs increasing across the board, and it's still a very sensitive conversation, but I'm finding that tenants are staying put.
Yeah, okay, good to know. What's the largest rent increase that you've done recently? Has there one that you can remember?
Uh, Probably $60 a week because it was a takeover from another agency and had been left low for some time. So we had to bring it back up to market, and there was still a significant amount of discount built into that for the tenant because we didn't
Yeah,
want to hit them too hard all at once. But yeah, it's a bit of a
yeah.
approach when it's been left idle for a while.
This is a problem. I remember seeing an article with an owner where there was a significant increase. I can't remember where it was. It might have been like $100 a week, so a fair amount. But like you said, it was also still way under market rate. And so when you only read half the story, it was like, mean landlord $100 a week, but actually they had been on such a bargain, paying only 300 instead of 500 a week, for example, for the last 3 years, where the owner was kind enough not to do any increases. And then this is one thing that I talk to clients about is you're better off just having it as regular because that's otherwise what happens. You might be forced to be put in a position where you do have to get market rate, and then all of a sudden you sort of look like the bad person because you're doing it all at once, but no one looks at the fact you've done 3 years
With
without it.
Yeah, and it's kind of to the tenants as well. Like then they're not facing rent shock if they're just gradually increasing year on year. I find that's a common issue for landlords thinking they're doing the right thing, but they're actually probably hurting the tenant in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's go through the rental yields. Just touch on that briefly. Like, what sort of rental yields are investors expecting at the moment?
So our median is 665 for houses and 524 for units.
Yeah,
I think the days of 5% is gone, just with what's happening in the marketplace at the moment, just in terms of pricing to purchase. But particularly because that over 650 has been so sensitive on pricing, we've seen a bit of an oversupply in stock come into the market in some areas. Are finding that, I guess, achieving, outstanding results can be quite challenging in order to get a quality tenant.
yeah. People buying properties where they need to have a reno. Is that sort of happening a lot where you are to sort of increase that rental yield, or a property's pretty decent?
Yeah, I think I've been dealing with a few investors who are looking at that purely because they're trying to just get into the market. Like there's not enough stock to purchase at the moment. So they're exploring all opportunities, whereas they may not have looked at that before. But I guess a recent example just this morning, he is looking to spend about 915,000 on the purchase. We're hoping to get 670, 680 per week. So there's a fairly big discrepancy there.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, that's probably pretty consistent. And he has been looking for, I want to say, and very like aggressively the last 6 to 8 weeks, and keeps missing out well above whatever he's set. And he's setting a reasonable, he's not trying to get a bargain.
No. Is he a local investor or an interstate?
Yeah, local. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
He's
because
options and he's, putting offers in and just getting nowhere near where it needs to be.
because I can't imagine there would be many interstate investors wanting to buy that sort of return.
Established home with that return. No, what I've got from interstate investors is constructions coming to completion.
Okay.
Yeah. And they're more in it's technically metro, but more regional metro areas.
And what do those case studies look like?
Well, and that's the challenge, right? Because the construction on these was 18, 24 months ago, and we're seeing a lot of construction come to completion at the same time. So we have a supply issue with far too much stock. One that we had recently was 640 per week in the northern areas, and we couldn't give it away. And it was the cheapest 4-bedroom home in the area. But the challenge is that for tenants in that area, they can go one suburb out and it makes no difference to them. So we had to consider not just the suburb that she was in, but also the surrounding suburbs, because that's what the tenants are looking at. So we ended up renting it for 580 after, I think, 69 days on the market. It was
Wow.
the longest one I've ever had, and I don't know how long.
Yeah, wow. And it's also interesting, you mentioned that tenant mentality stepping outside that suburb, or, they don't mind stepping outside the suburb, because that's one thing that I've noticed in Perth is that people are very area specific and they just don't seem to look in outer suburbs, like just one across where they could potentially get a much better bargain. I find we're just so specific. I don't know if do you have like school zone issues and things like that?
Yes, to a degree, but I don't know if it's a geographical thing that in South Australia, you can pretty much go a few streets over and you're in a different suburb. So we're all quite tightly condensed generally. Whereas I'm assuming you've got a bit more space between suburbs in WA. But yeah, I'm finding definitely they're not in certain areas. So in the coastal areas, yes, people are very suburb specific, and that will then relate to particularly high school zones, because there's not a lot in that particular range. And then the hills can be quite suburb specific as well. But I guess the other areas are very much
all merged and mingled in together.
Yeah, like if you're looking in the western suburbs, you'll generally have a really big stretch of suburbs you would consider. If you're looking specifically in the east, unless it's in a school zone, you're going to be quite broad with your search as a tenant.
Yeah, interesting. Are there any law change or legal changes that have happened in the last 6 months since we've spoken that are affecting clients?
Yes. So probably the latest reform, we had previously not been able to end a fixed term tenancy, or really any reason, unless the owner was moving back in or significant renovations. Now a reform has come out that you can end a fixed term tenancy with a signed agency agreement. So if you're selling the property, that is reason to end a tenancy.
Okay.
The end of the term. So we've seen, I guess, more sales happening or planned happening.
Yeah, okay. What if you were moving into the property?
Yeah, if you're moving into the property, you can end the tenancy at the end of the fixed term. So
yes,
the fixed terms are still protected, of course, but I guess nationally with, the shift of trying not to end tenancies, we've definitely had some pretty strict rules around it. And even significant renovations, for example, there was some cases that were, I guess, essentially allowing the tenant to stay because it wasn't deemed significant enough. It's essentially the properties, run down, not fit to be lived in, that they would deem suitable for a renovation.
Yeah, okay.
That doesn't cut it. Even a new bathroom didn't cut it because they already had a bathroom. So they were like, well, that's not reason for the tenant not to live there.
Yeah, okay. And what about the rent increases? Is that still 12 monthly?
Yes, so every 12 months. And there was, I guess, ruling around that the tenants had 14 days to dispute a rent increase if they weren't happy with it. I personally haven't seen or heard of anyone doing that as yet, but I'm sure it'll be a matter of time.
Yeah. And is there anything proposed coming in that anyone seems worried about?
I don't believe so. I think there was, I guess, more talk around some of these other reforms changing or adjusting, but there was a lot of, I guess, push on the fact that this change has now come out, but I haven't heard of anything else major coming.
Yeah. So we'll sort of finish off with like the actual investor market. So you've mentioned that you've got some local investors that are buying. Interstate investors, you mentioned they're more the clients that had bought the land and house packages a couple of years ago. What about like recent purchases? Anything happening?
I'm not seeing or hearing too
No.
much of. And I know some of the buyers agents I speak to, it's definitely a lot more localized at the moment. They're still getting them, but not like we've seen previously.
It would be pretty hard to you'd be banking, I guess, as an investor, banking on your what you expect, the future to hold, and the opportunity there, not necessarily the current returns. I would have thought.
Yeah, I think we're almost at that point that you guys had some time ago, that it was just this peak buying frenzy and then it reached the top of the bubble and then paused. I don't think we're quite at the top of the bubble yet, but it's definitely close.
So, given that there's not a lot of stock available to buy, does that mean that the investors are now more likely to think about selling? Like, have they made like a good amount of money on their property in the last couple of years, or they haven't reached that point yet?
Yeah, I've definitely had a few conversations with people who've considered that. But ultimately, I guess the sentiment is that we're still not quite done in terms of where the price will reach before it sort of calms down. So whether that's probably next year, I would think. But yeah, there's still just not enough stock for people to buy.
Yeah, we found that because there's not a lot of stock available at the moment, that clients are able to sell their property and get a really, really good price. So just two case studies we've had recently was one that we've got on the market for sale, and it was appraised at around the 820,000 mark, and the offers are still in negotiations well above 900. So because of the low stock, the owners are going to probably get an extra 100,000 there. And then that was in the eastern suburbs. And then I've just got off the phone to a client in the Rockingham area, which is obviously where it was the most busiest, 3 years ago, or probably 4 or 5 years ago now. And he purchased his property 4 years ago for 410,000, and we're just doing an appraisal on it, and it'll probably be about 800,000. So he's going to sell that and pay off his principal place of residence. So that's like nearly doubled. So definitely clients like having that, that good return, but that's because the rent has peaked in those suburbs. And I guess I don't know if there's any more opportunity in the rent. And then in line with that, the sales stock is so minimal that it's also a good price. So it's like just like a perfect situation for them. But
I think we're in the same boat too, that rents have hit their ceiling. I don't see there'd be any further real increases in the next 12 months in terms of what we're currently at.
Yeah. Just a question I just thought of. When you have your applications come through, the affordability for tenant applications, is that coming through? Are people being pretty sensible with what they're applying for, that it's in their range, or are they out of that affordability percentage?
Well, because I think it's always forever been that 30%, right? I don't actually have data on that, but anecdotally, I think it's a lot more common around that 40%. But looking at the overall picture, what were they paying in rent previously? Is there a huge jump? It's not necessarily a no because they're over that 30%, but I think it's a lot more common to be over 30.
Yeah, okay, good to know as well. Do you have any advice for investors buying in the market? Is there an ideal type of property where you're seeing the best case studies?
Yeah, not 3-bedroom, 1-bathrooms.
Okay, that's good to know.
Anything unusual and bigger homes absolutely are getting a great rental return in terms of, if we're talking that 5-bedroom, if you can find them,
Really?
it's super in demand. Blended families can't get places, and they're prepared to pay a pretty good premium for that. And really, it's I'm sure you're probably the same, but it's the aesthetically pleasing properties. That traditional older home on a big block, like they're very tough to shift. And units are still really strong because of that affordability point. So yeah, I'd be going to something a bit different because that's all we've got at the moment is an oversupply. So if something's a bit unusual or it's got a granny flat, it's got that, medium density living option, like it's something different that will get the good rents and the good quality tenants.
That's a really good tip. When you were saying before about the clients that are building and then there's a whole heap of those new builds come up, I remember having the same conversations with clients to say, you've got to remember, like if all the houses are of the same age, they're all 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom. The only thing you've got to compete on is price. And so you're going to find that there's going to be a while for it to balance out with the stock levels to get that. But I like the idea of the uniqueness and buying something a little bit different. And it is interesting you're saying with blended families and 5 bedrooms, because we talk a lot about how there's more divorces and separations. So now we've got 2 homes per family, which is actually one of the reasons a while ago that I felt like that we had that the rental market was really good for clients because of that situation. But I hadn't actually thought about the blended families, whether we're finding that a lot of that is happening in Perth or if people are staying separate. Because, like my story, we're a blended family and we built 2 extra rooms in the house. And then but now just because of the age of the children, we haven't separated, the houses have separated, and I'm just living closer to my kids' school just for their last final years and vice versa. And so I'm not finding that we're getting a lot of the blended families merging in WA, but I always like to look at different states to see if there's any trends that might follow. And I'm wondering if that's like a little secret thought that those listening today, if you're thinking of buying in Perth, maybe to follow that same concept, that might be a trend to follow. I like that one.
Okay. Yeah, just big homes and even big families. Like they're professional people who are looking to rent for a period of time for whatever reason, and they just struggle to find big homes to rent. Unless it's, there's a huge difference between just a nice presented home and then, you've got your Esplanade properties and you've got that very expensive sort of executive rental. There's nothing really in between for these families. So that's probably
the market you go in
that budget. It's an interesting market.
Okay, amazing, fantastic tip. I always appreciate your time, so thank you for sharing that on the ground. It just paints such a more clearer picture. And those that are listening, if you are looking to buy in Adelaide, reach out to Sky and you can nut down on any sort of suburbs you're thinking or anything more specific as well. And then, and so reach out to Sky if you need that. And if there's any questions for the WA market, of course, you can reach out to me and I will see you all in another 6 months.
Thanks, Ash.